Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into a really unexpected part of American history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about the rise of fascism in America
In America.
in the years leading up to World War II.
I know, right?
You're probably thinking, wait, didn't America fight against fascism?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but turns out the story's a lot more complicated than we think. We're
Yeah.
going off of this interview with Rachel Maddow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Author of Prequel, An American Fight Against Fascism. It was on the American History Hit podcast.
Okay.
So get ready, because we're going to uncover some pretty wild stuff. Do you know Henry Ford, the car guy?
Uh-huh.
He had this, disturbing role in promoting anti-Semitism.
No way.
And get this, Jim Crow laws, they were actually a model for Hitler.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah,
Oh.
seriously. And there was even a plot to overthrow FDR.
Whoa. What?
That's crazy, right? Oh, and this is just wild. There was even a celebrity architect with a dark secret.
An architect. Okay, I'm intrigued.
I know. It makes you think, right?
It does. It really does. It's like, we think we know a story, and then bam,
Yeah,
something like this comes out.
totally. Okay, so, first question, right off the bat. Why were some Americans even, interested in fascism before World War II? It seems crazy.
Yeah, it does, but you have to think about the context. The Great Depression, right? The whole world's gripped by it. People are desperate for solutions.
So anything looks good at that point.
Pretty much. And fascism, with all its talk about, order, efficiency, it kind of seemed like the answer to some.
Right, like a quick fix.
Exactly. And you got to remember, this is before, the horrors of Nazi Germany were fully revealed.
Right, right. So they didn't really know what they were getting into?
Exactly.
So, okay, it's amidst all this chaos and desperation, some people saw fascism as this path to stability.
Yeah, it's kind of like a familiar pattern, right?
Mm.
When things are bad, people want a strong leader, someone to just fix it all.
Oh, that's so true. You see it all the time, even today.
Exactly. It's like, history might not repeat itself exactly, but it sure does rhyme.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about Henry Ford.
Okay.
The Model T guy, the car guy.
Uh-huh.
Well, it turns out there's this, much darker side to his story.
What do you mean?
So he wasn't just an industrialist. He was a media mogul.
Oh.
Yeah. He owned this newspaper, the Dearborn Independent,
Okay.
and he used it to spread his anti-Semitic views.
Wow, really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And he even wrote this whole book, The International Jew, The World's Problem,
Huh.
and basically blamed Jews for everything. Labor unrest, financial struggles, wars, you name it.
Wow. That's pretty extreme.
It was. And the thing is, he was so influential.
Right. People listen to him.
Exactly. So he's spreading these really harmful ideas to a huge audience.
Yeah, that's scary. It's like he was giving people someone to blame, a scapegoat for all the problems.
Right, it's their fault, not ours.
Exactly. And when you have someone as powerful as Henry Ford saying that, it's dangerous.
It really is. And here's the really chilling part.
Oh no. What?
Hitler, he actually admired Ford.
What? Seriously?
Yeah. He even kept a portrait of Ford in his office.
Wow. That's pretty disturbing.
It is. It makes you think about how ideas can spread, you know?
That's like they don't stay in one place, they cross borders, influence people far and wide.
Totally. And in this case, the influence was really, really bad.
Absolutely.
Okay, this next part is really disturbing.
Okay. I'm ready.
The Nazis, they actually studied Jim Crow laws.
What? Really?
Yeah. They saw America's system of racial segregation as a model for their own plans.
You're kidding.
Nope. They were fascinated by how America could legally subjugate black citizens.
America's supposed to be about freedom and equality.
I know, right?
It's just mind-blowing. This country founded on these ideals, and then, it provides a blueprint for one of the most oppressive regimes in history.
It's crazy.
It really makes you think about the contradictions, the dark side of history,
Yeah. Even democracies can have these deep flaws and contradictions. That's a lot to process.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, let's talk about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Okay.
You familiar with that?
Yeah, I've heard of it. It's that document claiming a Jewish plot for world domination, right?
Right. It's totally hoax, completely made up.
But it still spread like wildfire, didn't it?
Yeah. It's a prime example of disinformation with a really long and troubling history.
And it's still around today, too. You can find it online.
I know. It's crazy how these dangerous ideas can persist even when they've been completely debunked.
It's a good reminder that we got to be careful about what we believe, what we share. Like, critical thinking is so important.
Absolutely. And guess who played a key role in spreading this lie?
Let me guess. Henry Ford.
Bingo. His newspaper published excerpts from the protocols, helping to push this conspiracy theory into the mainstream.
It just goes to show how influential he was and how dangerous his ideas were.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about Nazi propaganda in America.
Okay.
So they were pretty sophisticated with their approach. They used all these psychological techniques, targeted messaging, all that.
Right, to influence people's emotions, beliefs.
Exactly. They used direct mail campaigns, tailored messages for different audiences. They even targeted college students.
Wow, so they were really going all out to spread their ideology.
They were. It's kind of like they were running a marketing campaign for fascism.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
But the thing is, not everyone bought into it, right? There were people who saw through the lies and fought back.
Oh, yeah. Like who?
Well, there was this guy, Henry Hull.
Okay, I don't think I've heard of him.
So he was a direct mail expert.
Okay.
And his son, he was a student at UPenn.
Oh.
And he started getting all this pro-German, anti-Semitic stuff in the mail.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. So Hull, being the direct mail expert, he's like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
That's pretty cool.
It is. And get this, he traced it back to the U.S. Congress.
No way.
Turns out German agents were exploiting the congressional franking privilege.
What's that?
It's this thing where members of Congress can send mail for free.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So the Nazis were using that to flood America with propaganda.
Wow. That's sneaky.
It is. And Hull, this regular guy, he exposed the whole thing.
So what happened then? Did Congress get in trouble?
Well, it led to this whole thing called the Great Sedition Trial in 1944.
Okay.
But it didn't really have a clear outcome. It was a mess. The judge died during the trial, and then when Truman took over, his Justice Department dropped all the charges.
Really? So they just let everyone off the hook?
Yep. Even the congressmen involved in spreading the propaganda.
Wow. That doesn't seem right.
It doesn't, does it? It makes you think about, accountability,
Yeah. It's like even when there's clear evidence of wrongdoing, it can be hard to hold those in power accountable.
Totally. But let's not forget about Henry Hull. He's the hero of this story.
He
Just a regular guy who saw something wrong and did something about it. It's pretty inspiring.
It is. It's like even in the face of all this, manipulation and powerful forces, one person can make a difference.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of really heavy stuff.
I have.
Henry Ford's anti-Semitism, Jim Crow as inspiration for the Nazis, even plots to overthrow FDR.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But what about everyday Americans? How are they reacting to all this?
Well, it's important to remember that America was really divided back then.
Oh, I bet.
Some people, they were drawn to the ideas of fascism.
I guess that makes sense. Times were tough. People were looking for answers.
Exactly. And fascism, with its promises of order and strength, it appealed to some.
Especially since they didn't know the full extent of the horrors the Nazis were capable of.
Right. That information wasn't widely known yet.
So it's easy to judge in hindsight, but back then, it was a different story.
Absolutely. But it's also important to remember that there were a lot of Americans who actively resisted these ideas.
Oh, good.
Yeah. They spoke out against hate, organized against fascist groups, worked to protect democracy.
So it wasn't like all of America was embracing fascism.
No, not at all. It was more like a battle between these opposing forces,
A battle for the soul of America, kind of.
Yeah, I like that. A battle for the soul of America.
And thankfully, the forces of democracy, they held strong.
They did. And we owe a lot to those who fought against fascism back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is. And what's crazy? It shows how these threats can come from anywhere. Even cultural icons, you wouldn't expect it. Yeah, that's so true. Speaking of unexpected, we mentioned the Great Sedition trial earlier. It sounds like something straight out of a history book, What was that all about?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. It came after years and years of investigating all this Nazi propaganda and, subversive activities going on in the U.S.
Oh, wow. So who was actually on trial? What were they accused of doing?
So basically you had the Justice Department, right? They were trying to hold accountable all these people spreading Nazi propaganda.
Okay, that makes sense.
And on the other side, you had this group of 30 people. One of them was George Sylvester Viereck, pretty well-known author, but also, get this, a Nazi agent.
Whoa, wait. They put an actual Nazi agent on trial. here in the U.S.
Yep. Viereck, he was like a big player in that whole Nazi propaganda machine in America. He used his connections and influence to, like, spread pro-Nazi messages and try to, turn people against the Allies. It's crazy to think that these fascist ideas were able to reach so deep into American society. So, what did Viereck say to defend himself? Did he just deny everything?
He claimed that he was just exercising his, right to free speech. Said his writings were protected under the First Amendment.
Oh, so he was hiding behind free speech. It's like, how do you balance that right with the need to protect everyone from dangerous ideas? It's a question we're still grappling with today.
No kidding. The trial itself, it was like this whole long, drawn-out thing. Tons of legal back and forth, heated arguments, you name it. The prosecution, they were working hard to prove Viereck's ties to the Nazis and show all the ways he tried to spread propaganda here.
So did they have a strong case? Like, how did the trial actually play out?
It went on forever, like 7 months. They were having a hard time putting together a clear story, and then boom, the judge, he died right in the middle of everything.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. So what'd they do? Did they just, like, get a new judge and start over?
Well, with the judge gone, Truman's Justice Department, they made this really controversial decision. They dropped all the charges. Everyone, just like that.
Wait, they just let them all go after all that? Why?
There were a few reasons, probably. Some people think the prosecution's case just wasn't strong enough to get a conviction. Others think it was all political, like Truman wanted to move on from the war and focus on rebuilding. Historians are still debating it today.
It's a tough one for sure. It doesn't feel like justice was served.
Yeah, I can see that. Some people see it as a win for free speech. Others see it as a failure to make those who worked with the Nazis answer for what they did.
I guess it depends on how you look at it. What happened to Viereck after that? Did he just go back to writing like nothing happened?
He stayed a pretty controversial figure, up until he died in 1962. He wasn't out there actively promoting Nazi stuff anymore, but he still, expressed some sympathy for fascist ideas.
That's kind of unsettling that he could just go back to his life after working against America during the war. Didn't anyone, call him out on it?
I think his case just shows how complicated it is to deal with the legacy of extremism, especially when it comes to reconciling after a conflict like that.
True. It's scary to think those ideologies just stick around, waiting to pop up again in new ways. This whole thing about American fascism has been such an eye-opener. I had no idea it was so widespread.
It really makes you realize that no country is immune to that stuff, even one built on democratic principles.
So how do we keep those dangerous ideas from coming back? What can we do to protect ourselves today?
Education is a big one. We need to know the history, recognize the warning signs, understand the tactics used by, those who want to divide us and exploit our fears.
So, knowledge is power, right? But is that enough? What else can we do?
We have to be willing to speak up when we see hate and intolerance. Challenge those dangerous ideologies and fight for our democratic values every chance we get.
It's not just about learning from the past. It's about using that knowledge to make things better now. We can't just sit back and watch. We have to be active in shaping the future.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get back to Nazi propaganda in America. We were talking about Father Coughlin earlier, but I'm curious about what other methods they used.
Yeah, they were pretty good at manipulating people, weren't they?
They were. Very sophisticated, very intentional with their techniques. They knew exactly how to, hit people's emotions and spread their message.
I'm curious, what kind of stuff did they do? Were they just straight up lying and scaring people, or was it more subtle than that?
One of their biggest tools was the radio.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
They knew how powerful it was, that it could reach so many people, and they used it to broadcast their propaganda all over America.
So they were trying to brainwash people through the radio?
Maybe not brainwash exactly, but definitely influence how people thought and felt. Repetition, emotional appeals, those were their bread and butter.
Wow, that's sneaky. Who were some of the other big names involved in this? Were any Americans helping spread this Nazi stuff?
Yeah, there was Father Coughlin, like we said before. He was a Catholic priest, believe it or not, and his radio show was incredibly popular.
Wait, a priest spreading Nazi propaganda? That just seems wrong. How could a religious figure like that support that kind of ideology?
It does seem strange, but Coughlin, he was a very charismatic guy. He had a huge, loyal following.
Okay, the people trusted him.
Exactly. And at first, his message was about the economy. He was against the banks, Wall Street, all that. It appealed to a lot of Americans struggling during the Depression.
Makes sense. When times are tough, people look for easy answers, someone to blame.
Right. He was tapping into that fear and frustration. But then, slowly, his message started to change. He started talking more about anti-Semitism and fascism, weaving it into his speeches, almost like you wouldn't even notice.
So he was being sneaky about it. Didn't anyone call him out on it? Did anyone realize how dangerous his message was becoming?
Well, people definitely noticed. But Coughlin, he was really good at deflecting criticism. He acted like he was the authority, the one with all the answers. And he used his show to attack anyone who disagreed with him.
So he was creating an us versus them situation.
Exactly. Classic fascist tactic. Silence dissent, make people afraid to speak out. So how big was his audience? Was it just a small group of followers, or did he have more reach than that?
That's what I'm wondering.
Well, at the peak of his popularity, he had around 30 million listeners.
30 million? Seriously?
Yeah. Huge number, especially back then.
It's scary to think how many people were listening to him. It shows how powerful the media can be, how much influence it can have, for better or worse.
Absolutely.
So what happened to Coughlin in the end? Did he get in trouble for spreading all that Nazi propaganda?
Well, once the U.S. entered World War II, his influence started to decline. The government ended up shutting down his radio show. No more platform for him.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they finally put a stop to it.
It's good to know that there were limits to his reach. And it makes you realize how important it is for the government to keep an eye on the media and make sure dangerous stuff isn't being spread.
Right. It's a tricky balance, though, isn't it? Protecting free speech, but also protecting people from harmful ideologies.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. So Coughlin wasn't the only one spreading this stuff, right? Were there other groups or people involved?
Oh, yeah, there's a whole network of them. Individuals and organizations working together to push the Nazi agenda and make people doubt the Allies. They were publishing pro-Nazi newspapers and magazines, organizing rallies, all sorts of stuff.
It's like they were trying to make fascism seem normal, like it was a legitimate option for America.
Exactly. They wanted to create this illusion that it was a real choice, a viable alternative to democracy.
Did it work? Did they actually manage to sway public opinion in favor of the Nazis?
Well, they did have some success, especially with people who were already inclined to believe that kind of stuff. But overall, they failed to change the minds of most Americans.
That's a relief. Why do you think they failed? Was it because Americans just rejected those ideas outright?
There were a few reasons. One big one was that America has a strong tradition of democracy and individual liberty. The Depression was rough, but most people weren't ready to give up on those values and embrace an authoritarian system like fascism.
That makes me feel a little better. It's like deep down, Americans knew that fascism just wasn't right for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as news of the Holocaust started to spread, support for the Nazis really plummeted. People saw the horrifying reality of what they were doing, and it became a lot harder to defend them.
It's like the truth eventually came out and people saw the Nazis for what they really were.
I think that's a good way to put it. The truth, combined with America's commitment to democracy, ultimately prevented fascism from taking root here.
This whole story about American fascism is pretty wild. It makes you realize that we can't take our democracy for granted. It's something we have to constantly protect.
Absolutely. We have to be aware of the dangers, stay informed, and be ready to stand up for our values.
So let's talk about some of the specific groups that were active during this time. You mentioned the German-American Bund earlier. What can you tell us about them? Were they really powerful?
They were one of the more prominent groups. Their whole thing was promoting Nazi ideology among German Americans. They held rallies and parades, often decked out in Nazi uniforms with swastikas and all. They even ran summer camps for kids, trying to indoctrinate them from a young age.
That's messed up. So they were basically trying to create a mini Nazi Germany within America, like their own little fifth column.
You could say that.
Yeah.
They definitely attracted some media attention, which helped them spread their message, but they never really gained widespread support. Most Americans saw right through them.
Did anyone try to stop them?
Oh, yeah. Jewish organizations, labor unions, civil rights activists, all kinds of folks pushed back against them. A lot of regular Americans, too. They were disgusted by the Bund's pro-Nazi stance and spoke out against it.
So even with all this fascist activity going on, there were still people fighting for what's right. That gives me some hope.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the vast majority of Americans never bought into the Bund's ideology. Their efforts to promote fascism were mostly met with rejection and condemnation.
What about the government? Did they do anything to stop the Bund, or did they just ignore them at first?
At first, they kind of took a hands-off approach. They were worried about violating First Amendment rights and all that. But then, as the Bund got more brazen, and especially as the possibility of war with Germany became more real, the government started to crack down.
So they finally realized how dangerous these guys were.
Yeah, it took a while, but they came around. They understood that they had to protect the country from being undermined from within.
Makes sense. So how did they crack down? Were they just watching them, or did they do more than that?
They ramped up surveillance on the Bund, infiltrated their ranks to get info, and eventually they just shut them down. They revoked their charter and took all their assets.
Wow, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Nope. National security comes first. It's interesting, though, right? Trying to balance protecting individual liberties with keeping the country safe. It's a tough call sometimes.
Yeah, those aren't easy decisions. So what happened to the Bund after that? Did they just disappear?
Pretty much.
Hmm.
Once the U.S. entered the war, their influence fizzled out. Most of their members were either arrested or deported, and that was pretty much the end of them.
It's a good reminder that even these extremist groups, as scary as they seem, can be stopped. But we have to be aware of the danger, take action, and stand up for our democracy.
You got it. You can't be complacent. We have to recognize the threat and be ready to defend our values.
This whole conversation about American fascism has been really enlightening. It's like a whole side of history I never knew about. It's complicated, it's messy, but it's important to understand.
Exactly. It's a reminder that human nature is complex, power can be seductive, and democracy is fragile. And it's a story that's still relevant today as we face new challenges to our democratic institutions.
This has been a really incredible deep dive. I've learned so much.
Me too. It's always fascinating to delve into these lesser-known parts of history. They can teach us so much about who we are and where we've come from.
Okay, so after all this, what are the big takeaways? What should we remember about the rise of fascism in America? And what lessons can we apply to today?
The biggest one, I think, is that democracy takes work.
Yeah.
It's not something you can just set and forget. It requires us to participate, to be aware, to stand up for what we believe in.
Right, we can't just assume it'll always be there. We have to fight for it. What else? What else should we learn from this period?
Well, we have to recognize the tactics used by those who want to undermine democracy. The disinformation, the propaganda, the fear-mongering, the division. We have to be able to see through that stuff and call it out.
So critical thinking is key.
Absolutely. And media literacy. Be aware of where your information is coming from. Check your sources. Don't just believe everything you see online.
So it's about being informed, engaged, and skeptical.
Exactly. We can't be passive. We have to be active participants in shaping our democracy.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about the current political climate. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day stuff and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Oh, yeah. It's a good reminder that those same forces that fueled fascism back then, they're still around today. The economic anxieties, the social divisions, the desire for simple solutions and strongman leaders, it's all still there, just lurking beneath the surface.
So what can we do to stop these dangerous ideologies from taking hold again? Is it about changing policies, changing laws, or is it more about changing our own mindsets?
I think it's a bit of both. We need systemic change, for sure. But it also starts with each of us. We have to promote critical thinking, embrace diversity, be willing to have tough conversations with people who disagree with us, and we have to be willing to stand up and speak out against hate and injustice wherever we see it.
It's a big task, but it's one we can't shy away from.
Exactly. We can't be complacent. We have to be active citizens, engaged in our communities, holding our leaders accountable.
This has been a really powerful conversation. It's made me realize how important it is to understand history, especially the darker chapters, so we can avoid repeating the mistakes of the past.
It's true. The past can be a guide, a warning, and a source of inspiration. It shows us what's possible, both good and bad, and it reminds us that we have the power to shape the future.
You know, it's easy to look back at this period and think, wow, people were so naive. How could they fall for that stuff? But it makes you wonder, are we any smarter today? Are we any less susceptible to manipulation?
That's a good question. The methods have changed, for sure. Instead of radio broadcasts, it's social media algorithms and targeted online content. But the basic principles of propaganda are the same. Appeal to emotions, create scapegoats, spread misinformation.
So we have to be careful, be critical of what we see and hear.
Absolutely. Question your sources, look for diverse perspectives, and don't let yourself get swept up in emotional rhetoric. And most importantly, fact-check everything.
It's like we need to develop a healthy skepticism about the information we're bombarded with every day.
Exactly. And be aware of your own biases. We all have them, and they can influence how we see the world.
This whole deep dive has been a wake-up call. It's shown me that the fight against fascism isn't something that ended back then. It's an ongoing struggle, and we're all part of it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Understanding history is crucial to recognizing and resisting those same threats today. Those forces that fueled American fascism, the economic anxieties, the social divisions, the scapegoating, the allure of authoritarianism, they haven't vanished. They're still out there, waiting for the right moment to reemerge.
So we can't let our guard down. We have to stay informed, engaged, and ready to defend our democracy.
Absolutely. We can't afford to be complacent or apathetic. The future of democracy depends on our active participation.
It's inspiring to think about all the people who fought against fascism back then. They showed incredible courage and determination.
Yeah, they did. Ordinary citizens, journalists, activists, law enforcement, they all played a role in resisting the rise of fascism in America. They're a reminder that we can make a difference too.
It gives me hope, knowing that even in the face of such a powerful and dangerous ideology, people were able to stand up and fight back. Their actions show us that we have the power to shape the course of history.
That's a great point. History isn't just something that happened in the past. It's a living force that shapes our present and our future. And we all have a role to play in writing the next chapter.
Wow, that's a really powerful thought. So if you could leave our listeners with one message, one thing to remember from this whole conversation, what would it be?
Remember that the fight for democracy is never truly over. It takes constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. And never underestimate your own power to make a difference.
That's a great message. So on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought. What will you do to protect the values we hold dear? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a truly fascinating and important chapter in American history. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's amazing how, things that happened so long ago can still feel so relevant today. Makes you wonder what else we can learn from the past to help us figure out, what to do now.
Right. It's like history can give us this roadmap, not to repeat everything exactly, but to understand how people act and what shapes whole societies.
Yeah, yeah. Like we've been talking about economic troubles, social division, scapegoating. That's what, helped fascism take root in America before the war. Are those same things happening now, do you think?
It's a good question. We're living in a time of crazy fast change, technology, economic inequality, politics are so divided. It can definitely make people feel uneasy, uncertain. And when people feel that way, they're more likely to fall for simple solutions, even authoritarian ones. So are we destined to repeat history? Is fascism gonna make a comeback?
I don't think so, not necessarily. History can warn us, but it doesn't control the future. We can learn from what happened before and, choose a different path.
Okay, that's good. So what can we do to stop these dangerous ideologies from becoming popular again?
We got to actively build a society that values critical thinking
Right.
and embraces diversity,
Mm-hmm.
makes everyone feel included. And we have to make sure our democratic institutions are strong and actually working for everyone.
That sounds like a big job. Where do we even start?
It starts with us, with each of us, right?
Yeah.
Being careful about the information we consume, thinking about our own biases, and being willing to talk to people who see things differently, respectfully, of course.
So it's both personal responsibility and bigger changes that need to happen.
Yeah, I think so. We can't just wait for someone else to fix everything. We all have a part to play in protecting our democracy.
It's empowering to think that, what we do individually can actually make a difference.
It can.
Yep.
And it's not about being naive or anything. It's about recognizing the real dangers and, doing something about them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really glad we had this conversation. It's been eye-opening.
Me too. It's always good to dig into these parts of history that people don't always talk about.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history is full of surprises, and we can always learn something from it, even the tough parts.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that we have a responsibility, right, to learn from the past, to understand what's happening now, and to shape the future.
That's deep.
Right. The future of democracy, it really is in our hands.
Okay, well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into, a pretty intense chapter of American history.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you learned something new, and we hope you'll keep thinking about these ideas and how we can all work together to protect our democracy. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.